So today we saw the reintroduction of King of Eternal Winter, which is the monthly Night King event. And alongside this, we have seen the introduction of Night King's weapon into the game. This has been something that's been long theorized as being maybe the biggest power spike in the game to date. At least that was perhaps an expectation of it. So I'm going to go over in this video exactly all the details of it and exactly how it's going to change his awakening effect in combat. So just as a note before that, it will cost, if buying through here, effectively $5,000 or 50,000 black diamonds to max this weapon. You can, interestingly, actually get it theoretically free to play, just like you can Night King medals. It will, of course, take an absurd amount of time doing that, but in this challenge quests where you typically got the Night King medals for free, you can now actually select between his weapon fragments and his medals. And that's the same for all of these. Interestingly, the recharge one, you could get 2 medals or 2 fragments for the weapon, whereas this free-to-play one was just 2 medals or 1 fragment. So fragments from the recharge one were actually a bit of a better conversion there compared to the medals, which may be relevant to some people, but probably not considering the price bracket this is actually in. So in terms of the weapon itself, we have up here all details about Night King's base awakening, and then below it, each stage of the weapon. So this follows quite a similar pattern to a lot of the recent releases, where the biggest spikes are at base and 4-star typically. The base awakening ability is when a allied lineup loses more than 20% of its troops. So here in this screenshot, which is what I'm going to use to map out some more details of this below, you have a 960k solo march here. This report is taken just from the most recent report of the Night King I have in my UT. It's just taken from here, and I used it because it's a fairly balanced report. I lost, and both of us lost like 60% plus of our troops, and that'll be somewhat relevant in the theory crafting of it, because obviously if you totally destroy someone, you won't lose these 20% troops as easily. And on the same note, if you get destroyed, you're facing into a stronger player, these will trigger quicker. So there'll be a lot of variables there on the exact values of them, and I do use the uptime to sort of give an impression of that in some of my charts down here. But when you lose 20% of troops on a lineup is one of these. So this here is C1. He's running mono cav here. So you got C1, C2, C3, C4, and C5. Each of them is effectively this 960k number divided by 5. So it's 20% of that in each lineup. So when 20% of those go, you will have the Night King summon 90% of the troops lost as White Walkers, and the lineup of the attack will increase by 20%. So you can see what this looks like in reports exactly here. The White Walkers tooltip is important to note, since this is quite integral to how good Night King is, which I showed on here at the bottom. When you look through reports, it will show when these White Walkers are defeated as others, and these others act somewhat as loss prevention in a similar way that the Reinforcement Dragon skill does, because when the others die, it isn't the cavalry dying, and you'll see in this second of the report that losses are split across the two of them. It's sort of common sense, because if these whites did count as actual troop loss, you'd basically be able to have more dead than you had troops sent to the fight, which obviously isn't possible with hospital space and whatnot. And the lineup attack will also increase by 20% here at base. So there's a few things to note here. One is the loss prevention. 2 is the attack increase, which will become significant at these later stars. It goes up to 100%, which is a big deal. But then you also have, effectively, this is acting as army size in practice, because as your troop numbers go down, you'll then gain new troops, and when you filter that by uptime, it will practically act as army size, because you'll have more troops throughout the fight that you wouldn't have otherwise, dealing damage and whatnot. And that will also acts as both an anti-snowball mechanic and a snowball mechanic. So the way I visualize this myself, as an easy to refer to example is female. A big reason female is so popular at the moment and performs so well is the snowball element. So you hit someone at 1 second, particularly if you have the F5s and whatnot, and you have Salma procking, you have Layla procking, off all the Salma reprocs, you have Daenerys's dragon attack hitting, you have the Wildfire of Cersei procking off all the Layla reprocs, and it's all casting at 1 second before you can actually deal any damage into that. So by the time you can actually deal damage into your enemy there, they've gotten huge amounts of damage off into you, and you could potentially be fighting into 100% of their troops with like 70% of yours. And obviously, through that, they're going to start to snowball on you because they just have so many more troops dealing damage into you, and you're doing reduced damage because you have less troops hitting them, and that problem just sort of exaggerates further and further as you go across the fight. Night King will both counteract that by restoring the troops that you lose, so they won't have that numbers advantage on you that they would have had otherwise. But if you're in, say, like Bleed v Bleed, and you're running Night King, and they're not, that same dynamic will happen just a bit later in the fight, because once you reach this point where you get the troops restoring, you'll then have such a significant numbers advantage over them that then you'll start effectively killing more of their troops than they'll be able to kill of yours. And second by second, that will add up and just become a bigger and bigger problem for your opponent. So that snowball part is probably the best thing about Night King, which is very hard to show in like a graph or a chart like I have down here. And that has to be remembered all throughout. And that's going to really play a role with this percentage increase of troop loss that gets resummoned. So at base weapon, you gain 30% additional troop restoration, which is a lot. Then it's a jump of 5%, 5%, 5% after that, and then a jump of 35% from 3 to 4 stars. And the intermittent stars will have these jumps of plus 25% lineup attack, plus 25%, and then plus 30%. So the biggest jumps will be at base weapon and 4-star weapon because of this increase to the troop restoration. And once you do get to 4-star, something to note as well, so at 4-star you get 10k army size rather than the normal 5k. The total attack and total health is also a bit higher. The stat rolls you can get on the weapon, however, are still the same. So the maximum base attack you can get, for example, is still 12, just like it is with like John and Dana weapons and weapons like that, the existing F5 ones. So there isn't power creep to base attack, at least. The biggest problem this is going to pose for players running into max accounts especially is this 170% troop restoration. Because basically, by the time you kill 20% of their troops, which, if they have this, if they have 4-star Night King and 4-star Night King weapon, killing 20% of their troops in itself is ridiculously difficult. But when you actually get them to that point, you're then going to be fighting into more troops than they actually started with. And there's no limit to this, so this is going to count on rallies. And you'll see as I show down here, like when you rally with 6 mil or above, this is going to be bringing back like over 2 million troops across the 5 lineups combined. And when you can see that through the perspective of that snowball element, it becomes very, very scary. And this weapon, obviously, as you would expect, is very, very good because of that. I mean, it's basically doubling the effect of Night King's Awakening, which is very intimidating. So I've taken snippets from a report just so this is a bit, one, more easily consumable visually, because you can actually see where all the numbers are being taken from and exactly how it's working. The numbers to the side here, these are the seconds that these procced in, and these are the up times. You're going to have these White Walkers throughout the entire fight, which typically lasts 40 seconds, or always lasts 40 seconds. And these won't always be uniform numbers from 20%, because of course you can overkill that 20%. Like at 11 seconds, these were proccing, I believe, from commander damage. So if you have, say, a Spearman commander hitting into cavalry, as we have here, with active damage, and they're already at 19% troop loss already on that lineup, you're obviously then going to overkill that 20%, and then from that point, it will then restore the 90%. So you'll never have exactly 20% troop loss restorations. Using these numbers, you can then math out exactly what these would have given with different stages of the weapon by just rejigging the percentages a bit. So these are all proccing at 90%, divide that by 90, you have your 1% value, then you multiply it up by 125, and you then have your 125% value, and so on and so on. So in terms of total triggers, compared to the base awakening, you'll see that he would have restored, in this exact report, an additional about 150,000 wights in terms of a practical army size increase, which is what you're getting when accounting for the uptime. It goes from somewhere around like 12-13% to well above 20%, an additional 100k effective army size on a UT solo march. And it becomes even more stark when you look at this as a rally. So what I did here was just multiply this up by 6. Again, you can really start seeing the huge numbers this starts to reach. Size has always been king because of what I said earlier about the snowball elements of it, where they just have more troops hitting into you, and that will gradually just wear on you over the fight as they're having more kills on you every single second, and then your damage sources on them just get lower and lower and lower across the 40 seconds when you already need to kill more of them, obviously, to drop their already higher number than you down. So I don't think I need to analyze this much more, honestly. I mean, it's quite obvious the Night King's weapon is going to be very, very good. It's such a niche group of people that will ever be able to access him. And I do think it will be fairly game-changing at the top levels of the game, at least, mostly because of that snowball element. Again, like imagine if you're playing a RPG of sorts and the boss has 1 million health, you drop it to 800k health, and you're like, oh, we're doing great, we're almost there, 20% in, and then he heals to what would it be, like 1.17 million health, and you're just sat there looking at this guy like you literally have just healed beyond your initial health bar. That's ridiculous, and it will be exceptionally hard to fight into anyone who has this if you don't, particularly where the casualty rate increase is getting value and stuff like GB, CCS, KVK, just world map PvP. I don't think it'll be as stark an issue in the likes of AC because he is still effectively synergyless. Like for Bleed, for example, where I did my video on Sandor's weapon, John Daron Rhea, Sonara obviously undroppable, and then you have that last slot with Sandor, Night King, something like that to go in there. The Night King is bringing an absurd amount of troops, and the anti-snowball is huge. But on the same note, if you're hitting into multiple lines, the damage from Sandor with 4-star weapon is also just absolutely absurd in itself. Like the context, this number here, if you're hitting into 3 lineups with 4-star 4-star Sonara weapon all fight, it's the equivalent of 269 normal attacks. For context, I believe my numbers with the new Sonara formula that's actually correct. If the base Sonara 4-star without any additional levels will have a bleed infantry lineup on another bleed infantry lineup in rebel groups doing 272 normal attacks on average. So the damage Sandor with 4-star weapon is basically bringing the same amount of normal attack damage, theoretically at least, as like a mid-spender bleed lineup would, just by itself. Not exactly, but just for visualization purposes, that's how the numbers match. So obviously the Night King doesn't have that, so there will be opportunity cost still, and through that it might not be the end of the world. Like if you're running Cav female in AC, you can drop your Sanel, sure, but you're then losing the female reprocs, you're losing the actual synergy, all just for this army size snowball and snowball mitigation. So I know a lot of people are sort of up in flames over this. I think we have to see how it performs in practice to know if that's totally justifiable long term at least. But I do think for max accounts, you will start seeing this everywhere. However stupid it sounds for them, the 5,000 BD or $5,000 won't be that much for what you're actually going to get with this. You can run it in every composition. You're going to want to be running it a lot for the casualty rate increase anyway. So yeah, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of this moving forwards, unfortunately, which is a bit scary, to be honest, but what can we do? The game is what it is. There's going to continue to be power creep, and we always knew the Night King and his weapon was only ever going to be very, very good when it came out.